In this video, I'm going to cover an article I just had published in it's the Institute for Art and Ideas, and I'll put a link in the description below, and check that place out. It's a very, very cool place with so much diverse ideas and thoughts and reflections on consciousness, physics, psychology, really all the interesting stuff that makes this trip worthwhile. And so the article is all about the self and the connection to free will. And on the surface, it just seems like, look, if the self is an illusion, then free will also has to be an illusion. And there really is something to be said for that, because if you've watched any of my videos or read my books, the self is nothing more than a thought about what the self is. There's no substance to it. It's just another conceptual category that the thinking mind has created to explain what's happening. And I've talked so much about the left brain being inventive, being a storyteller, and of course the self is just another story. So when it comes to free will, of course, the whole point of free will is there is a self that's making decisions. The self is actually free to choose. And if the self is an illusion, then obviously free will is an illusion. But it's a little bit more complex than that. And if you've ever read anything from Eastern philosophy, there's always a paradox where we don't have free will, but we do have free will. And more particularly, I'm going to talk about one line from the movie Kung Fu that it always stood out. I can remember it from the first time I watched the movie. And the character, I think he only gets referred to as Old Man. And Kane is talking to him, and they're philosophizing. And the old man says, well, isn't it strange that I'm paraphrasing a lot here? He says, isn't it strange that I am absolutely free at every moment, but at the same time, everything is absolutely determined and flows in the path of the Tao, or something like that. And that captures the paradox really well, because while the thinking mind is limited to conceptual thoughts about reality, there is a certain freedom in going beyond thinking. So think about if you've ever read Dogen, the Zen master, and he has a really interesting line where he says, think not thinking. And well, how do you think not thinking? He says, go before thinking. And this is what I've talked about in a lot of my videos. How do you get to conscious experience without the clouds of categorical thinking? And it's absolutely possible. In fact, we do it all the time. Sometimes we're just lost in music, or we're on a walk through nature. But the thinking mind turns back on and it says, well, I was just, zoned out, or it doesn't take those experiences as very valid, because the thinking mind is doing its own judging from its own position. But of course, the thinking mind has no free will. It's like a computer program, as I described. I mean, if it had free will, there'd be no such thing as a panic attack. If we could control our thoughts, there'd be no such thing as an intrusive thought. So within that limited conceptual framework of the thinking mind, and unfortunately so much of the world is, you could say, trapped in that limited space of thinking, no, there is no free will. But what happens when there's the experience of being the observer of the thinking mind, which is to say, simply being conscious of consciousness itself without the limitations of thought? Is consciousness free? Well, that's a really interesting way to a path to kind of go down, because it's free in the sense that it is beyond the limitations of the thinking mind. It's free in that sense, and that's what I think that's what they use words like peace and joy when they get to that state. And again, I've talked about this so many times. It's like putting a bunch of luggage that you've been carrying around. You put it down and all of a sudden you feel peaceful. And that's the getting beyond the trappings of the thinking mind. It's, a lot like, imagine you're, grabbing hold of the bars of a prison cell, and you're just, I'm trapped in here, and you don't realize that actually you're on the outside. You're not on the inside. And that's the whole trick of the experience of recognizing that you are not limited by the thinking mind. You are consciousness. and consciousness is beyond concepts like free will versus determinism. It's beyond those categories that it created. So, and again, the best we can approach this, we can say there's a bit of a paradox going on here. Is it free? That's close to it, but it's beyond words. And that's why the mystics have always had such a difficult time really describing the experience. And so they put it as a paradox. So check out the article. I gave you a pretty good description, but, I go into more categories a little bit deeper. And so maybe you can put that together that, free will versus determinism. Anytime we're met with some kind of categorical opposites, that is the thinking mind doing its deeds, doing its trickery, and creating some illusion that it mistakes for reality.